Good afternoon and welcome to our live stream. We are here at the Royal Geographical Society in London on GIS Day 2022, and we are going to be looking at the topic of investigating the climate crisis as part of your NEA. What are some of the GIS data, tools and approaches that you can use? Just before we dive into all of the climate crisis material, you did hear me right. I did say that today is GIS Day. What is GIS Day if you haven't heard about it before? Well, it's a global initiative. It's an opportunity for the geography and the GIS community to share real-life examples of what they do in their day job and with the technology that benefits people in their community. It's a chance for us to share our accomplishments within the GIS world and to inspire others in terms of what we do. So on the map behind me, all of those blue dots are GIS Day events that are taking place across the globe today, essentially, and we are one of the dots on that map. Climate change and combating the climate crisis is one of those areas where GIS can have, a profound impact on our world. And that is why we're here today, to bring some of these GIS tools into your classroom, into your NEA, so that you can start doing some of that right now. So, you want to investigate the climate crisis. I think if you go to your sort of geography teacher and say, I want to do my NEA on climate change, they're probably going to make a face a little bit like, something like that. You can't tackle everything about the climate crisis in one NEA. It is too big and too complex a topic for you to cram into the kind of word limit that you've got available to you. Really what you're going to need to do is to pick an element of some of the causes of climate change, look at some of the impacts or some of the mitigations on a much more sort of local, controllable scale. You've got to make it something that's actually manageable in the time and space that you've got available. And that's actually what we're going to look at in a lot more detail as we move through today's live stream. But I just want to sort of reiterate and stress to you right now, just because something is local and small scale, it doesn't mean that it's not important. We all know that we're all going to have to change our behaviours and take action to mitigate some of the most catastrophic outcomes that are currently being predicted in terms of the climate crisis. And often the seat of that action, some of the most achievable things that we can do right now is on that local and community scale. And we're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail as we move through this live stream. So I just wanted to flag that up to you there and then. A couple of other things that I want to just bring to your attention before we really start to dig into data and tools and things like that. As we're moving through today's live stream, if you've got questions, then you can add them in the Slido and we'll come to those at the end of today's session and give you some answers for anything that's kind of come up over the course of what we've been talking about. I should also really introduce who it is that we've got here on the stage. So my name's Dr. Katie Hall.
And I'm David Morgan.
And we both work for Esri UK, that is the company that produces the ArcGIS online software that is free for schools, and that's what we're going to be talking about today in terms of these resources available for your NEA. So, one of the first things that you might want to do if you are looking at this topic for your NEA is to actually ground yourself with some local context. So when you're thinking about kind of a topic as broad as climate change, it can be difficult to find that data that's really specific and meaningful to your particular topic area. So that's the first data set that we really want to introduce to you today, and to let you know that actually even when you're working at a very local scale, there's some good quality data that's available that's been provided, in fact, by the Met Office in terms of looking at those changing weather conditions over time. So on the slide behind me, you can see there is this 50 years of UK weather data app that is available to you. If you want to access that, you can go to teachwithgis.co.uk, click on the Teach button, and then click on the Climate Crisis Resource Area, and it's at the top of that page. And we're going to move through some of this data now and kind of give you a bit of a sense of what we mean when we talk about local context in climate data. So this is sort of what the data dashboards look like, and we'll look at them in a little bit more detail in a minute. But you can see just on this one that's up on the screen behind me, on that timeline of temperature across the bottom, we've got May 1982 picked out as a date of interest. And I'm not looking at the whole of the UK here. The little map window there is zoomed in on Burton-on-Trent. What could possibly have happened in 1982 in Burton-on-Trent that might be of interest to us?
Me, I was born. So amongst things that Burton-on-Trent is famous for, we've got Marmite, we've got brewing, we've got this character who I've never heard of before, but apparently you might have seen on the TV. And I was born in this town in the Midlands in May 1982. I'm told that the day that I was born was a bit unusual for a May day because I'm told that it snowed on the day that I was born. I know that it's never snowed since in May, or at least on my birthday, because my dad promised me and my sister that if it snowed on our birthdays, he would buy us skis. And I'm still waiting for skis. So snow on the day I was born, but actually it wasn't that cold. The average temperature for the whole of the month of May in 1982 in Burton-on-Trent was 11.1 degrees. And it was relatively dry, 61.3 millimetres of rainfall.
So from that dashboard, essentially, you've picked out some almost personal kind of weather data. I think I might like to do the same. I'm going to move sort of 40 kilometres south and west a bit of where you were born, and just a few years into the future as well. So November 1986 is where I made my entrance in the illustrious town, well, city now, was a town then, of Wolverhampton. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's very famous for its wandering football team, historically made some pretty spectacular motorcycles, and obviously it made me. Now, I'm born in the autumn time, so it's perhaps not surprising that the average temperature for that year's November was only 6.7 degrees C. And it was quite a wet month as well, 98.5 millimetres of rainfall. So that's where we started out. We've got our sort of first dot on our graph, essentially. So let's step it forward in time. Let's maybe go to when we were the same sort of age as the folks watching this are now, about to take their NEAs.
So I was 18 in the year of the millennium. 2000, my 18th birthday. So May 2000 was a little bit warmer, 11.7 degrees, and a little bit wetter, 76.9 millimetres of rain in that month of May.
4 years later, this is me with my A-level results, I think, in this particular photo. Again, there's already been a slight rise in that average temperature. It's 7.1 degrees here. And it was an unusually dry November that year with 39.9 millimetres of rainfall recorded. So you saw a little sort of brief introduction to these dashboards at the beginning of this, but this is just your look at where this data has come from. So this is on that Teach with GIS website, as I've mentioned already, and you have the capacity to download all of the data that is here on the screen. This one here is for temperature. And we also, as we've mentioned, have the data available for rainfall as well. So you can explore it in the dashboards to get a sense of that context and to look at some of that change through time. But you might want to download it as well in terms of you being able to manipulate that data and do more with it in terms of the specifics of your investigation.
Yeah, and I guess just having 2 points in time, the day I was born, or the month I was born, and the month that I was 18, isn't a great kind of way of picking out a pattern. It's really easy to draw a straight line between 2 points, but not between maybe the 40 years of my life. It's not just going to be a continuous straight line. So here is the average May every year from 1982 to 2000. And we can see that there's a lot of fluctuation. We get warm months, we get cooler Mays, but overall, that trend line is tracking upward. So I was kind of spotting my slightly warmer 18th birthday than my cooler date of birth, my original birthday, seems to be kind of sitting along that line that is the trend.
And so we've picked out these places that are particularly relevant to us because it's where we started out from. But obviously, the whole of the UK is in that data set. So anywhere that you're particularly interested in conducting your investigation, whether it's your hometown or somewhere else in the UK, is available to you to look at this historic trends, essentially, in terms of weather data. I'm going to skip us forward again another 17 years to another fairly significant event in my life in January 2021, which was the birth of my daughter. Now, I can look back at the trends that have come before, but actually what's more relevant to her right now, sort of at the beginning of her journey through life, is probably more our predictions about what's going to happen next. And that's also something that's probably likely to be on your minds, the folks that are watching this as well. So as well as all of that historic data on weather, again, that we're very grateful to the Met Office for providing to us, we also have some predictive data about what conditions are likely to be like in our collective future. So on the screen behind me now, you can see some temperature projections. So we have some of the historic data here as well. You can see that first map panel is a look back at what conditions used to be like. And then we've got a sort of mesoscale and long-term future prediction of temperature here. So on this demonstration sort of behind me, you can see we're looking at summer temperatures, and I've picked a low mitigation scenario. So in some ways, this is kind of the worst case scenario. This is what's likely to happen with temperature if we really continue exactly as we are now, if we don't do a lot to sort of address some of those causes of climate change. And as with the sort of previous dashboards we looked at, you can zoom in on particular areas, and those dashboards will update to give you that more sort of local and personal view on that data. But one of the things that always sort of strikes me with this scale of data is it's quite hard for a lot of us to translate that number. So we can see that the average temperature is rising and is predicted to rise sort of more and more, but it's very hard to translate that air temperature number into something about our everyday life, about our everyday existence, you know, into an actual impact on us as people, as communities, as a society. So some of the other data sets and tools that we've made available to you actually look more specifically at what these changes mean for particular sectors of our life. So what does it mean in terms of agriculture, the food that we're going to be able to grow, the animals that are going to be able to survive in that changing climate, for example? What is the impact of that rising temperature going to be in terms of things like transport and travel? Are our railways going to continue to function? We saw sort of with the incredible heat wave over this summer where we had tracks that were sort of bending and buckling in the heat. You know, is that something that's likely to occur more and more often as we move forward? And what sort of scale is that going to happen sort of on as these changes take place? And health is also flagged up here as one of those resource areas. We don't have time, unfortunately, today to go into all of these in detail, so I'm going to drop into that health one essentially and look at some of the data that we've got in there. So now on the screen behind me, you can see we've got another of these predictive dashboards, and this one is looking at the percentage chance of a heat wave. So the temperature that we have to reach for it to sort of be classified as a heat wave varies slightly across the UK.
So a heat wave in Scotland isn't the same as a heat wave in the south of England?
It's not. It has to get a little bit hotter in the southeast of England for it to be fully classified as a heat wave. So that is sort of factored into these visualizations of that data. And obviously, I think the kind of key thing that you can see from just the color of that map as you're looking at it is this massive increase in the percentage chance of heat waves taking place. Fundamentally, we are going to experience more heat wave events as we move forward into the future. What does that actually mean?
Heat waves are great, right? It's good for ice cream sellers. We get to wear our shorts, we go to the beach.
Yep, that's often very much how it's portrayed in the media, and perhaps how we've traditionally tended to think about it as well when these events have taken place. But I think it is really important, you know, to be aware that fundamentally heat waves have a very negative, devastating effect on the more vulnerable in our society, particularly older people. And yeah, so this is some of the data from 2020 heatwave episodes in terms of the mortality of those events. And you can see in that 65 plus column there, sort of the increasing numbers of deaths that these events caused. And I just want to sort of flag that up, because if I just flick back for a second, on that 2071 to 2100 sort of predictive panel, everybody that is in this room, that is listening to this live stream, we're going to be very, very old by the point we hit that panel. So we are very much going to be in that 65 plus category. So we're not talking really about some abstract future event. We are talking about things that are going to have an impact on us towards the end of our lifetimes, and very much in the lifetimes of kind of the generations that come after us. So that's where some of this sort of predictive data is hopefully useful for you in terms of considering what is likely to happen in my area. What are some of the things that are already potentially locked in when we look at those kind of middle scale predictions, because there isn't enough time now for us to take action to really combat that change. That is something that is pretty baked in now. But that longer term modelling, that is something that we still have some control over, that we can make a change to. So when we talk about mitigation, we've got this twofold kind of thing, where there's some things that we are just going to have to really accept sort of adapting to, and there's other sort of changes that we need to make in terms of making sure that change isn't as catastrophic, perhaps, as some of those low mitigation scenarios suggest it's going to be. So this is the point where I ceremonially hand over the clicker, because Dave, you're going to take us through sort of some of those mitigations and adaptations now, right?
Yeah, and I guess some of those mitigations and adaptations and ways that we might adapt our lives to live with climate change and to minimise the impact of climate change and to minimise the effects of those kind of longer term those long future graphs, perhaps make those into those low mitigation scenarios or high mitigation scenarios where we kind of get our act together, rather than those low mitigation scenarios where we don't really do much between now and then and we kind of live our lives as we are. They might be really kind of interesting foci for NEAs. They might give us really interesting topics to explore. And one of those that I kind of want us to take a little look at is this idea of a 20-minute neighbourhood. So Katie's talked about the fact that climate change is having currently, and will probably in the future have an impact on how we get around. If we want to live in a way that releases less carbon, we know that we can do that by reducing the number of car journeys we're taking, maybe using public transport more, cycling more, walking more. Using the train, perhaps not a great, the best kind of way, because we know that as well as perhaps the heat affecting our trains, we're perhaps already quite familiar with the wrong kind of leaves, with snow on the line, all of those kind of seasonal problems that we have with railways, and they're only going to increase in the future. So one solution to this, and particularly if we look to some of our European neighbours, perhaps Copenhagen, perhaps the cities of the Netherlands, is this idea of living in a 20-minute neighbourhood. And a 20-minute neighbourhood kind of is what it says on the tin. It's having everything that you need within 20 minutes walking or wheeling time. So either cycling or walking, and be able to meet the majority of your needs within that area. So if I go back in time to where I was living at the time that I was 18, so if I was doing an NEA as an 18-year-old, this is where I'd be doing it. So this is my place. And this is my 20-minute walking area around my local area.
So is that something that you have kind of gone out and physically walked and tested and then like hand-drawn on the map?
God, no. Imagine walking 20 minutes in every direction from your own house. What I've actually done is I've asked the GIS to do that for me. So I've used one of the analysis tools in ArcGIS Online called Drive Time. But I've told it not to base this distance on driving 20 minutes, but on walking 20 minutes. And this is what the GIS has worked out. By mapping 20 minutes along every one of the roads or paths that I could have walked, it's drawn this funny shape, little orange blob. And there's a little hole somewhere towards the northeast of my house. There's a little island that I couldn't get to within 20 minutes of walking. So it's just kind of an interesting little artifact there. So that is my world as an 18-year-old if I could only travel 20 minutes on foot from my door. And because that's the edge of the map, why not make it look like the edge of the world?
So is that one that you've kind of clipped out in Photoshop, or?
Nope, still in ArcGIS Online. So I'm in the new map viewer now, and I've just used one of the blend modes in the new map viewer, and it's a blend mode called Destination In. So basically I've sucked the base map into my driving time. So this is the edge of my 20-minute world.
I really love this as a representation of exactly that, the edge of your world. And I think this is a really kind of different cartographic approach that I don't think a lot of NEA examiners are going to have seen before to kind of visualize and represent this. Really interesting way of doing it.
So what's in my 20-minute world? What have I got there? Do I have all the things I need to live? Okay, well, one of the things that was on that model of what's required in a 20-minute city is access to education. So the red buildings, the red shapes on this map are schools. I can see the school that I went to up there in the north, and that was both my primary school and my secondary school. The big sort of blob towards the sort of southeast, that was the secondary school that I went to for sixth form. So you can kind of see that I live sort of equidistant between the two of those two big secondary schools.
And did you walk to school?
I did walk to school, yeah. When I started secondary school, I couldn't have walked to the secondary school that's kind of in the southwest, but actually kind of building of new houses meant that new roads appeared, and it would have probably have been easier to walk to the other secondary school than it would have been to the one that I actually went to.
Interesting.
So kind of simple little changes, things like perhaps adding a different gate to a school grounds might make a school be within or without of my 20-minute neighbourhood. So these are kind of things that maybe we can look at in a little bit more detail. In terms of shops and supermarkets, I've got a choice within my 20-minute neighbourhood. I'm lucky. Check me out. I've got 4 supermarkets within my neighbourhood, and I've got a selection of different brands. I'm not sure when I was 18 if these were the same brands. There's definitely some that weren't. They were still there as supermarkets, I think, but maybe under different brand names.
And that brand sort of information is important maybe in terms of considering how much money people have got to spend on products at the supermarket. I'm also wondering, just kind of looking at that satellite image, particularly the red Tesco dot there, it kind of looks like it's in quite a densely populated little area. It doesn't look like it's a sort of a big out-of-town type Tesco, and that's maybe sort of a strand of the data that you'd need to pull out if you were really investigating this as part of an NEA.
Yeah, absolutely. All the data sets that I'm using here all come from ArcGIS Online. They're all part of either the Living Atlas or data sets that have just been shared publicly in ArcGIS Online. So I've just searched those collections and added them to my map. But this layer, this supermarkets layer, is really up to date. And contains, as well as the name of the brand of the supermarket, contains information about, well, when did it open, and what is the size of that supermarket. So I can separate out some of those kind of local Tesco's, those small corner shop type Tesco's, which this one is, you spotted it right, from those big superstores. So the only one, I think, on this map that is like a big superstore supermarket is that orange Sainsbury's in the south. You can kind of see the big car park around the edge of it. That would be our big supermarket, and that was where my mum always went to do her big shop when we were kids. A final kind of map on this theme. So another one of those sort of elements of a livable 20-minute neighbourhood was access to green space. It's really important, particularly if we're kind of densifying our neighbourhoods to make it possible to live within 20 minutes of everything we need, to squeeze out that green space. But we can see, using this data set from the Ordnance Survey, that I've got a reasonable kind of access to accessible green spaces, and quite a mixed diversity. I can remember walking to the allotments that are one of those sort of brown splodges up towards the north with my dad, and standing in a pile of horse muck and being told that if I did that, that would help me grow. I never met my ambition of being 6 foot tall, which is what I said I wanted to be when I grew up. So I'm not sure if that worked or if that was kind of just him having us on.
What I really like about this, where you've kind of layered the data about accessibility, is it actually shows you the access you have. Because if you were just looking at this as a satellite image, particularly sort of on the sort of south side of that map there, it looks like there's an enormous amount of green space that should be accessible to you as somebody that's living in this town. But actually, it's not. It's not something you can sort of easily get into.
Yeah, so some of that green space in the south, some of it's playing fields, are located, sort of associated with that secondary school, kind of down towards the south. Some of it's just privately owned green space. So there's kind of a mixture there. It's not just that I can get to all of the green places within this map.
And you'd already picked up as well on the different sort of functions there. And I'm kind of shocked at the number of bowling greens that Burton-on-Trent has. You know, in terms of who is using that space, there's maybe considerations around kind of the age range of people there. You know, and if there's young children wanting to play, then actually those green spaces are probably not the ones that they're going to need to go and access. They need to go more to those playing areas, which there are sort of fewer of on that map.
Yeah, there are fewer there. And actually, a big chunk of that swathe of green space to the south of the map there, when I was a child growing up in this area, that wasn't even green space at all. That was an open cast mine. So there was enormous, great coal mine on the edge of our village. And to drive out and to get into town, we had to sometimes wait for kind of massive, great dumper trucks the size of a house to drive over the road before we could carry on our journey. So that green space is a relatively new area of green space.
Interesting.
Fantastic. So that's one possible area that we could look at.
So in terms of that 20-minute city idea, I think that is sort of something that is, if we do it, it's maybe going to improve that future climate change scenario. It's about reducing those emissions. It's kind of an action that, if we start to take now, is going to have that implication for that longer-term future. But as I already mentioned, there's some actions that we need to take that are probably more of a direct response to those changes that are baked in, the rise in air temperature that we know is going to happen. So is that another example?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's where this example maybe comes in. So this is perhaps about making the places that we live more comfortable, whatever happens, even in that kind of middle future of sort of 2040, 2050, 2060, when we know that our cities are going to be warmer than they are now, maybe not as warm as that worst case future scenario, but still hotter. So we know that trees are a great thing in terms of tackling climate change, both in terms of sucking in carbon, but also in terms of other things that they deliver for us. And one of the great services that trees give us is shade. The ecosystem service of shade is a really valuable one in our urban areas. So for this example, I've taken us to what could be anywhere really, but it's actually Sheffield. Why Sheffield? Well, Sheffield is kind of pretty famously one of the greenest cities in the UK, but it's a city that also has a really interesting kind of controversial story around its street trees, its urban trees. Probably about 5 years ago now, the council in Sheffield decided that the most economic way of managing their urban trees was to chop them all down.
Not very forward thinking.
Not so great in terms of kind of thinking forwards to all of the benefits that they provide now and in the future. So every red dot on this map is a tree that I've been out. I could have been out and surveyed. I haven't been to Sheffield and measured every tree, but I could have done. So these could be trees that I've surveyed. And I might record, well, where are they? How tall are they? what species are they? Because all of those things are going to impact on the amount of shade that they provide. A tree that's close to a house might give more shade to that house. A tree that's taller might give more shade than a tree that's shorter. And the species might affect its shape.
Okay, so this is the same data set, but you've turned it into 3D.
Exactly. So these are the same trees. Every red dot on my last map is now a tree.
And this wasn't something that you did like on a special piece of software somewhere else. This was in ArcGIS Online.
Yep, so this is me in scene in ArcGIS Online. So I'm now in the 3D map viewer in ArcGIS Online. And rather than say use red dots, I've said use trees as the symbology. The height of the tree tells me something, or tells me everything about the height of that tree in real life, because it's scaled in real life. And the shape of that tree is also representative of the general shape of a tree of that species.
So again, I really like this because we know from some of those examiners' reports, you know, they're getting a little bit sick of dots on maps, and this is a really nice way to visualize this data set that's speaking exactly to the topic that you're addressing, and kind of giving them a different perspective from just that sort of, yeah, dots on a map view of the trees that you've collected. That's
Absolutely.
very cool.
And so, to take this a little bit further, what I'm really interested isn't in the trees, but is in the shade that those trees produce. Okay. So to find out a little bit about the shade, I need to turn on some daylight. So that's my next map. So what we can see here is the passage of a day, the 15th of August, because you've got to choose a day, so why not? And the shade that those trees create over the course of that day. So this is a really nice animation, but maybe I can use this as well to kind of quantify the amount of shade that those trees are creating, and the shade that those trees are giving to which buildings. So I can start to infer something perhaps about the impact of these trees in terms of shading and cooling the areas that they're in.
So this is such a lovely workflow in terms of you've gone out and you've collected some primary data, which you've done sort of using your mobile phone, Survey 123, kind of that part of the GIS technology. You've visualized it in a really innovative and interesting way on a 3D map as well as that 2D map. And then you've applied a pretty simple analysis tool, something that is just there sort of in the main panel window. It's not sort of, you know, hidden away in a specialist section or anything like that, in terms of addressing that shade topic.
Absolutely. So everything here is completely kind of just out of the box, off the shelf in the 3D map viewer. This daylight tool sits inside the little sun on the right-hand side, and I could choose any day of the year, any time of day, and I've just turned on shadows to make sure that those kind of shadows track around.
That's pretty cool, that one. I like that one.
So moving on from that, are those trees distributed evenly across my city? Is every person in the city, in every neighbourhood in this city, benefiting equally from the cooling effect of trees? I might take that a little bit further. I might kind of step on and explore this as my next sort of topic. So I might be comparing two different neighbourhoods in Sheffield rather than just the one that we've looked at so far. And maybe if there is a difference, does that link us through to index of multiple deprivation? Are we seeing the impact of perhaps the leafy suburbs, those kind of nice, perhaps more expensive streets, those neighbourhoods where quality of life is maybe higher, where we're perhaps suggesting that maybe more wealthy people live? And are we seeing the same benefit of trees and shading in those less deprived neighbourhoods? Or are we spotting an inequality there?
Yeah, and I really love this. Again, I think it's just a really nice example of the way that the GIS lets you bring in, you know, you had a sort of a physical geography topic here, looking at tree species and kind of size, essentially. And now you've brought in some human geography data to contextualize that, and maybe the final part of this kind of NEA topic might be sort of initiatives where some tree planting needs to take place to address some of the inequality that exists there in terms of access to that ecosystem service. And, you know, it's all publicly available data that you can find with a quick search and just bring together in a browser window on any computer.
Absolutely, and how fab that you could use your NEA to then make recommendations to your local council to say, hey, we need to plant more trees here because these households, these neighbourhoods aren't benefiting in the same way as someone else.
It really comes back to that point that I was making at the start where, you know, this NEA project can be very personal and very meaningful, and it's not just something that you're having to do, you know, to pass your A-level essentially. It is something that you can take forward and take out in a meaningful way to your broader community as well.
Absolutely. So this example, I guess, was a bit more of a mix maybe of sort of human and physical geography. How about if we take ourselves right into the physical geography?
I'm just looking at that question and I am immediately imagining the face of a teacher who gets that brought to them. And it's a bit like the face of a teacher when somebody says, I want to do climate crisis for my NEA, because Hampshire, the largest county, I believe, in England, all of the woodland that we're talking about here.
It kind of sounds like a big job, doesn't it? I wish I could see the faces of teachers around the country who are watching this. It kind of sounds unachievable, but let's break that down a little bit. Okay, so here we've got a map of Hampshire, and all of the orange bits on that map of Hampshire are the deciduous woodland in Hampshire. I probably should have lumped on all of the woodland, but what we're looking at here is just deciduous, broad-leaved woodlands in Hampshire.
And again, is that a public data set?
Absolutely. It's all from a land cover data set called Careen, which is a sort of European-generated land cover data set, which sits in ArcGIS Online and is findable. But that's still a lot of woodland. We can see there's a lot of orange. If I was going to travel around all of those woodlands and measure trees in every one of them, that's not going to work. But it might help me find a woodland that's maybe near to the town that I live in, that's accessible, that I could get permission to go and work in. Maybe this is a public park or something like that. So I can find myself a woodland to go and sample. And sample's probably a key word there, that I'm not going to go and still measure every tree in this woodland. I might choose myself some areas. So I might use some random sampling to pick myself some grids within that woodland and sample every tree in that area of known size.
So just to pause there for a second, what you've done with the GIS here is kind of a feasibility study on that question. So you're desperate to do it, you've brought it to your teacher and they've gone, I think it's a bit big. And so you've used that publicly available data to say, it is a bit big, but here's how I can take this down to a manageable chunk that's only a few hundred meters from where we are right now in school and where I can get permission to go and get access.
Absolutely, and even down to 4 grid squares that are maybe 100 meters by 100 meters square. So I can boil that down to a really small, manageable area. I can measure all of those trees. I can calculate how much carbon's in all of those trees. I can calculate for myself an average amount of carbon per 100 meters square, square kilometer, and then I can go big. So once I know how much, roughly, an average value of how much carbon stored or how much carbon sequestered per square kilometre of woodland, based on my sample, I can start to scale it up. So I know that within Hampshire, there is 526.5 square kilometres of woodland. Now, this is all woodland, so maybe my sample should have been all woodland, not just deciduous woodland, so there's a little bit of a split there that I perhaps should have thought about. But we get the idea. I know how much carbon is in 1 kilometre square. I know the total. So all I've got to do is times the two together.
So you took it from that very local investigable? Yeah, a scale that you can investigate yourself, and you've brought it back out to the scale of that entire county.
Absolutely. Is it the perfect answer? Probably not. There'll be lots of limitations there. I've taken a sample of a sample of a sample and then extrapolated based on that. But I've got an idea.
But you also mentioned as well that these data sets on land cover they're not just even the UK, they're European-wide. So in terms of comparing and contrasting different places, you could look at your county, you could look at another county somewhere else in the UK, but you could also look at a different location somewhere else in Europe and look at different strategies that might be in place in those different areas and the impacts they're having in terms of carbon sequestration.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's think big. Let's change that question that was all about Hampshire and go to all of Europe.
Okay, okay.
Who knows? So hopefully we've kind of illustrated a few examples there of places that maybe GIS could be a starting point, or a tool in developing a question, or a tool in answering a question, or scaling that question up to a bigger, like, okay, if this is right, what might that mean on a whole county, regional, country scale?
That is pretty cool, again, for something that you can just do on your own computer and with a sort of a bit of investigation out in your local environment, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Fantastic. So I think that is sort of bringing us to the end of the different examples that we've got to work through here today. What we're going to take some time to do now is actually have a look and see any questions that have come through from folks that have been watching along at home. And as always is traditional, I'm going to put up our Twitter handles there as well. So if you've got sort of more comments and questions and things that you want to bring to us later on, you can find us out there on social media and ask those questions there too. But right now,
we have some questions.
We have some questions.
We've got some questions, thank goodness, because this would be an awkward end to the session if we had no questions. So we've got some questions. So one question is around what scale we can go down to with those climate maps.
Ooh, with the climate maps.
Yeah, and I guess I'm probably best placed to answer that question because I made those maps. There's a little bit of variation. So let's go back to some maps. Which is going to involve swooshing back through lots of slides. So there's a little bit of variation between these maps and the future maps. So the historic maps, the ones that kind of look back through the 50 years of data, can go down to the scale of a 5-kilometre grid square. So each grid square in those maps are 5 kilometres by 5 kilometres. Yep. These ones, the future, the kind of projection grid squares, are a little bit coarser. Because those predictions are a little bit less certain. We don't know what the temperature is going to be in 2080, but we do know what it was in May 2020, or whatever year we choose. So these ones are 25 kilometres square, so 25 by 25 kilometres. So there's a little bit of difference between the two, but you can get down to a pretty high resolution for your local area.
Historic dashboards, 5 kilometres square, predictive dashboards.
25, so 25 by 25.
Lovely. Any other questions? Like, I want to come and have a look.
So the next question is around those blend modes functions for our cutout maps.
So I think there's probably other questions that folks have out there as well in terms of, okay, that looked cool. How do I drive the GIS to do that? And the best place to go in order to find out more information about that is still on the Teach with GIS website, but there is a section called Teach About, or if you are on the front page, if you hit the button that says Learn, and that is where you can find all of our existing guides to driving the GIS, to running these different kinds of analysis, of putting data in there, all of those kind of functions. In terms of the blend modes themselves, that is a very new piece of functionality that we sort of are really only just starting to be able to use in the new map viewer. So there isn't a full resource for that one available quite yet, but I did mention our Twitter handles. One of the things that we'll do after this session is a little thread, I think, just walking you through what Dave did to cut those maps out using that blend mode tool to kind of build that little map of your personal world. And that's the reason why we sort of put those social media handles up there. As these questions kind of come up, as well as us, there is a much wider community of geography teachers that are using GIS that are out there active on social media. So if you tag it with those hashtags and ask the questions, either we'll get a chance to respond and kind of do an informative thread or link you to an existing resource, or it may very well be that somebody else who's already answered that question as part of their classroom practice will get back in touch with you and give you some information on that as well. But basically, if you want to learn how to drive the GIS, go to Teach About on the Teach With website, and that will give you the instructions.
Yeah, I think that's true. And what we probably will also do over the next kind of few days is just to post and to share those maps that we've actually made. So everywhere that you've seen sort of slides of maps, we'll share the actual maps as a digital form so you can kind of get in and have a little tinker around with it and explore those maps as well. Yeah. So you can go and have a little look around my 20-minute neighbourhood from where I grew up.
And another thing that we've been doing on a regular basis that we've really just started doing is something called our little 15-minute webinars. So if there's a topic of particular interest where we know that a lot of teachers and students want to learn more about that particular aspect of the GIS, we're running 15-minute webinars on those topics. So our upcoming ones, we've got things like water, using GIS to examine water, and we've got 3D in GIS, so those trees, I think, will need to make an appearance in that particular webinar. Again, it's on the Teach with GIS page. If you have a look on our events tab, you can pick up the live streams for those different topic areas and get more information on those as well.
Absolutely. We have another question about the tree data sets.
Oh, okay.
So the tree, I guess, going back to that Sheffield example and those locations of trees sort of data sets. So we, I guess we kind of have, we can have a slight sneak behind the curtain and the way that I might actually do it if I was doing an NEA. So those, should we go back to the red dots maybe? So the tree data set that I've used in this example, I hinted that I hadn't been to Sheffield and measured every tree. It's true. So these red dots, these tree locations, come from a data set from OpenStreetMap. So you might have encountered OpenStreetMap as a sort of like the open source mapping solution, like the Wikipedia for map making. So essentially anyone in the world can go and add data to Wikipedia, or no, to OpenStreetMap, a bit like Wikipedia. And it turns out that geographers are a pretty nerdy bunch, and someone in Sheffield has mapped the location of every tree, and for a lot of those also the height. That data set's not complete. So if I was doing this for my NEA, and I had a small neighbourhood or a couple of small neighbourhoods that I was interested in, what I think I would do is not rely on that data set that's coming from OpenStreetMap, but I would go out and measure those trees myself. So I might set myself up a Survey 123 form, and if you want more information on how you do that, check out the Learn button on the Teach with GIS site. I might have in there location, and I'd use my smartphone to capture the location of that tree. Height, and I'm going to have to do some measuring there, so maybe I need a clinometer so I can measure the height of the tree. And species, so that I can get an idea of the shape of that tree. So that's my Survey 123 form. I'm going to collect that data, come back home, sync that data up to the cloud, and all of those trees would be there.
And they'd be automatically mapped, essentially, because of the Survey 123 does that for you as you're out in the field.
Absolutely. So it's going to use the GPS in my phone as I'm going out collecting that data to put those tree dots on a map and ensure that I've got a completed data set as I've collected, rather than relying on someone else collecting that data set for me. So in terms of tree data sets, there is a data set in the Living Atlas, which is these OpenStreetMap trees. The coverage isn't complete. You can kind of see on my map there that there are, particularly in the sort of bottom right-hand corner, there are trees without red dots. And that means that they've not been mapped. It might be that they're in sort of inaccessible locations. It might be that they're just someone hasn't been and mapped those ones yet. So for my complete data set, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to make that my primary field work.
Lovely. Any other questions coming through?
No more questions on my tablet so far.
So I think we'll give folks another minute or so, just in case they're frantically typing a question out now that's going to come through into our little Slido there. If you're kind of watching this on catch-up and you're thinking, oh, I really wish I'd caught this live because I would have asked this question, as we've mentioned, you can always get back to us on Twitter and kind of ask away there. We look forward to it. Cool. Any more for any more?
No more yet.
Right. Well, if that is the end of our questions, then I will simply say thank you very much to my co-presenter. There are some amazing case study examples there in terms of really innovative uses of the GIS, looking at solutions and adaptations to the climate crisis. It's been really exciting to be part of GIS Day here today at the Royal Geographical Society. And I will just mention as well, there are other events taking place today from our education team. So if you've got an interest in careers in GIS, if you want to know how on earth people like me and Dave got to stand here on this stage and talk about all of these wonderful functions of GIS today, if you want to know how other people are out there actively fighting the climate crisis right now using GIS, as well as a whole other host of careers, rewarding and kind of enriching careers that are available to you if you've got these kind of GIS skills, then check out our Twitter feed, get the link to some of the careers events that are going on in the latter part of today around GIS Day, and find out more about what you can get up to with it.
Yeah, and those sessions are recorded as well. So like this one, if you've not managed to catch all of it, or you know that you're not going to get to that session, but you're interested in seeing what goes on there, it'll be recorded. We'll share it. And again, it will go out on all of our social media stuff. So
lovely. All right, thank you ever so much for joining us then, folks. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'm sure we'll see you shortly, either online or maybe even in a face-to-face space next time. Bye for now.
Bye.